I am the kind of person that I look for the humor in any situation because that's just sort of how I get by. What I needed to learn as a writer was to go from the hilarity of these situations to what novel writing is all about, which is having actual well-developed characters. People like to share what they know, and that's the biggest gift in the world for a writer because we're constantly needing to talk to people. I'm a fan of fresh starts. I think that comes through in my books. I like new chapters. I think there are just a lot of times for women when we have to sort of reinvent ourselves.
It's 2020 and the traditional book tour is out the window. It is COVID summer, but that's not going to stop us. Here at Fairfield County Look, we're giving you an intimate look at the author, Amy Poeppel, who has written her third masterpiece, Musical Chairs. And I'm joined now by Amy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
What a wonderful opportunity to get to know you on a different level. We're not in Barnes & Noble, we're not in a bookstore, but we are certainly getting the best of what you have to offer. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me first, life imitating art. Did you ever think when you sat down to write about this book of all these generations coming together, how it would be a replica of what's going on in real life during COVID?
No, I did not. I mean, I've always been fascinated by this idea of adult children returning to the home. Because I think I write comedy and I like to see the humor in most situations. And I think there is something so funny about adult children moving back into their parents' household, which is something even before the virus came, that was something that was happening more and more. And I just wanted to sort of incorporate that kind of humor where a woman is envisioning one kind of summer, maybe with a little bit of romance, maybe where you can sort of just eat what you want and not be thinking about what other people's needs, and to have that completely turned on its head and end up with these adult kids moving back home, and then add to that the older parent and sort of needing to take some responsibility for an older parent. And I just think there's a lot of room for humor in that. I did not know when I was writing this that my own adult children would be moving back home with me. That was a surprise, a delightful surprise in some ways, a ridiculous surprise in other ways. It doesn't always go smoothly, but we've had a good time together, and it's been a little bit crazy. I think a lot of parents are feeling that way.
Absolutely. It's interesting how the return of the core family, the original group of people, sort of changes so much after everybody's had a taste of independence and adulting and being who they are, and then having to revert back to these old familiar roles being under the same roof.
Right. And having adult kids, they're too old to tell them what to do. So when they leave the milk out on the counter, are you supposed to reprimand them? Or are you supposed to lecture them? Are you just supposed to internally be furious because why did they leave the milk on the counter? I mean, so it just makes parents sort of return to their former role, but it turns kids into their former selves as well. I think they regress a little bit sometimes. In other ways, they're absolutely so mature and grown up. And so then you as a parent have to sort of remember, like, oh, these are grown-ups. They're independent people, but they're under my roof. So it's just a lot of room for humor in there.
A ton of room for humor, and thank goodness that might be the only way that we survive this.
Yes.
And humor is a trademark in your voice as an author. And it is such a brilliant way to take the absurd and the real and sort of marry them together. Tell us about how if we didn't have this humor, we just wouldn't survive, especially now.
It's so true. I mean, I am the kind of person that I look for the humor in any situation because that's just sort of how I get by. So, for example, when I was working in admissions at a private school in New York City, and loved my job and I loved my colleagues and loved everything about it, there were certain times when certain parents would behave a certain way, or in an interview with a small child, the child would behave in a certain way.
As children do.
As children do, and as children should. And it was just so much fun for me to sort of think about going back and writing these scenes. And that's how I always start as a writer, is I start with dialogue. It's the favorite part of writing for me. I have a background in theater, so I think in terms of scripts instead of in terms of sort of longer narrative structures. So I always start with dialogue. Well, these interviews with children were the perfect place to just start writing dialogues and then turning up the humor and, keeping it real, keeping it grounded in reality, but just just turning the volume up a little bit on some of the more absurd parts of children's behavior, grown-up behavior, the entire admissions world anyway, where we're sort of judging children who are young, maybe shouldn't be judged. So that's how I think. I actually started that book doing dialogues between parents because I had been on the other side of the desk.
The fly on the wall.
Well, yes, I had started as a parent interviewing at schools, and my husband and I were so horrifically bad at it that's how my entire writing career started. Is I started writing down scenes of parents being interviewed by schools, and then I sort of turned, and then I ended up working in admissions. So I was like, okay, now I'm on the other side of the desk. I'm getting all of this insight. And I ended up turning that into my first book.
And that dialogue is fascinating to me. What do we love about putting ourselves in these absurd situations where we know we're putting so much pressure on ourselves, on our children, on our reputations, on what it all means to get into these institutions?
Yeah.
Tell me about what it's like to take these scenarios in life and put them on paper, and why do we enjoy them so much? Your readers love them.
I think what I needed to learn as a writer was to go from the hilarity of these situations to what novel writing is all about, which is having actual well-developed characters. And I feel like Musical Chairs is sort of the next step for me with that new skill, because it's definitely very much a character-driven book, and it's a large cast of characters, no doubt about that. But I think that once you've created these people and made them very real and made your audience care about them, then you can put them into these silly and outrageous situations and sort of see what pans out. My first few attempts at this are really more just satire. It's more just parody, which is fun. For a sustained novel, to really draw readers in, you have to get a much better handle on who these actual characters are. And it just makes the writing part of it so much more fun because then you know them, you know the characters.
You certainly get drawn in. And talk to me about your creative process, because when you talk about these characters and developing them, it doesn't seem to come in these little bits here and there. It's sort of an all-in process for you. You throw yourself in. You call it binge writing.
Yes, I am a binge writer. I would like to be a little bit more steady and organized. I'm a 55-year-old woman, but I still have goals and I still think that habits can change. My problem is that I get so into it that my laptop will be next to me on the floor. I'll wake up in the morning and think, okay, wait, where was I with that? And the next thing I know, it's noon and I'm still in my pajamas. And that's probably not the healthiest way to work. But
full immersion.
It's full immersion. That's just
no 9 to 5 hours here.
No. I don't do 9 to 5. I don't do lunch breaks. I don't do exercise breaks. All the things that I think are sort of for a good, healthy lifestyle. I'm afraid I don't do any of those. What I do instead is I just work for bursts. I work for and that might be, I might work a 15-hour day, and that may go on for quite a while. But I just get a lot more done in a shorter period of time. That's not a complete surprise to people who went to college with me. They would say I was the all-nighter girl, where other people would start 2 weeks ahead. I would
That was me.
Yeah.
But if your creative genius strikes you and you need to run with it,
yeah,
that's how it works.
It works. It works. I still have a goal that I'm going to become a bit more of a scheduled person. But I enjoy what I do, and I love being in that state of full immersion, as you called it. I really enjoy that. So I'm not in a huge hurry to change, but I think it's better for the back to get up. They say we should stand up and
take a breather.
Yeah.
So when we talk about full immersion, it's also in the idea that for Musical Chairs, you had to immerse yourself in something totally different. Whereas you had experience for Small Admissions and Limelight, this classical music world is not exactly what you were familiar with. Tell me about your exploratory process.
Well, that was a little bit scary for me because we always research. Authors always have to do research when they're writing books, and I did with my first 2 books as well. But the worlds that they were set in were more familiar to me. This was the first time that I set a book in a place that I'm very familiar with, but a world, a career that was not something where I have any expertise whatsoever. So It came about because all of my kids are very musical, and my youngest son has been just completely tied up in classical music since he was 5 practically, and now he's 20. And I've been, I've been introducing him, or I should say I've been taking him to different ensemble rehearsals since he was so young. And I just
What instrument does he play?
He plays piano. He started with classical guitar, and he changed over to piano. So he does composition and musicology now in college. But he went to a performing arts boarding school. And I just thought of the intensity of that kind. I liked the dynamic there. I liked the idea of, it was originally a quartet. In the process of writing the book, I decided it would be better to have it be a trio because I just liked that triangle dynamic better, and it just served the story better.
Someone is always the foil.
Someone's always the odd guy out. Someone's always there's just a lack of balance to that just works really well narratively. So that's what I ended up doing. But then I just had to do the research. So I had to figure out what would they be listening to, how much money would they make, what do their contracts look like, how much are they traveling. Bridget has children. Who's taking care of her kids while she's on tour? So I talked to a lot of people. I listened to a lot of music. I have one friend named Marcia Butler, who's a wonderful author of a great book called Pickle's Progress, if any of your viewers are looking for good fiction. And she was a professional oboist for years. So she was a huge help to me. I gave her an early draft, and she would, no. She was like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. How'd she buy that house?
Right.
Like you got to really think about like what the income level probably is and how did this happen and how did that. So she made me go back to the drawing board on quite a few elements in the story. I just find people are lovely in offering their expertise when you go to them for help. People like to share what they know. And that's the biggest gift in the world for a writer, because we're constantly needing to talk to people to get insight into some new career, some new hobby, gardening.
It must feel flattering that you want to write about their life.
Yep.
To give a glimpse to something so intimate in someone's life is probably quite flattering.
Yeah, and I think it's fun. I mean, I think it's fun to see your world represented well. Yes. I know for some doctors, there are TV shows that are medical TV shows that are painful to watch because they feel that they just depart too far from what the reality of that is like. I think you can take a little bit of artistic license, but you really do have to get the bulk of it right. Or it doesn't come across as authentic. It doesn't come across as expert the way that you would want it to.
For musical chairs, talk about authenticity. You have a home in Kent. That's your Connecticut connection.
Yeah.
Plus the fact that your mom was raised in Riverside.
Yeah.
So tell us about your childhood. You have this Texas connection. You have this Connecticut connection. And how it came full circle back to Connecticut.
So I grew up in Dallas. I was born in Dallas, and I grew up there. But I have a Connecticut mother and a Texas father, and they met in Washington, D.C. And my father's work he's a cardiologist, and he's a medical school. He teaches medical school, and it took them back to Texas. My mom was not the biggest fan of Texas. I should say, I'll put it more kindly, my mom was a real fan of the East Coast. So I grew up listening to her talk all the time about the East Coast, and she would take me to Connecticut to see my grandparents. And about halfway through high school, she decided that boarding school was going to be a really good idea for me. So I left Texas when I was about 16 years old, and I went to Kent School in Connecticut, just right out of Texas. That first September, I remember when fall came and the leaves changed and those mountains in Litchfield County just lit up, and I had never seen anything like that.
You didn't know what hit you.
Did not know what hit me. And while boarding school can offer challenges that I didn't always love, I always felt connected to the place. I just did. I just always felt like some part of me sort of belonged in Connecticut. So I went off and lived my life and lived in San Francisco. I lived in Berlin for a couple of years, did a lot of traveling, had 3 kids along the way. And my husband and I always embraced a new change. And so we decided to move to New York City. And with 3 little boys, felt we needed some grass, somewhere that they could run around and play. And we ended up buying a house, of all places, in Kent, Connecticut, which wasn't really on purpose. It's just that it was the area that I loved. And then the house that we fell in love with happened to be 4 miles from the school that I went to. So that was just a funny, not entirely a coincidence, but a little bit of a coincidence.
And of course, you have lots of places that you call home. I love that you describe yourself as a nomad.
Yeah.
Tell us about sort of this propensity for moving around from one interest to another, from one place you love to another, and of course the international flair that Germany presents for your family.
Right. I'm a fan of fresh starts. I think that comes through in my books. I like new chapters. I like women of a certain age having a new chapter. I think our lives, whether we're raising kids or not, working, moving, I think there are just a lot of times for women when we have to sort of reinvent ourselves and start over again, whether it's, kids growing up or divorce or any of these things. And I know how hard that can be, but I also think that big changes can present such a wonderful opportunity to try things that you've never done before, to live somewhere that you've never lived before. So I've never been one when my husband says there's a job opportunity in this new place. I've always been one to say, let's go check it out. Let's try it. And so because of that, we've moved quite a bit. Just a few years ago, my husband, who's at NYU, got an opportunity to move to take another job in Germany. And I said, well, that's a neat way to do. I thought I was going to be an empty nester at the time. And I thought, well, that's an interesting way to have an empty nest. We'll be in Frankfurt, Germany, and we can travel and we can go places. And that's what it's been. It's been fantastic. Of course, now things have changed quite a bit. I haven't been there in months now. But I think actually my next book is going to have some German expat component to it, because that feeling that I have when I'm there and I speak the world's worst German. My German is an offense to Germans everywhere.
But you try, and that's what matters.
I try. It's really embarrassing, but I try. But those moments of insecurity, those moments of feeling off balance are, I think, great opportunities for plot. It's just a great opportunity for fiction, a great opportunity to put two people together who maybe wouldn't otherwise meet, which for fiction is always just a great, that always just opens up possibilities. So that's what I try to do.
And I love the idea that in thinking about your next book, you are sort of bringing this dialogue together again, thinking about characters, thinking about the melding of two different worlds. What do you think makes it such a special experience for your readers who are really transformed? I think we need that escapism.
I do too, now more than ever. I don't know, I know everybody's feeling that their focus is a little bit off lately, and I understand that completely. But I have found, especially in the last several months, that fiction has just been saving me. I love it. When I have an issue with focus, I'll go take a walk and I'll listen to the audiobook. I'll start a new book with an audiobook.
Interesting.
It just helps. It's like attending the theater. We can't attend the theater right now, but if you get a well-narrated memoir or a well-narrated work of fiction, I think it's a great way to sort of get yourself lost in a story. And then later at home, you'll be like, where am I? And you can get the actual book out or the Kindle or whatever you prefer to read and find where you are in the story. And I think that's a great way to sort of get going. So I have really been reading and reading and reading these last few months. So I'm hoping that books that have sort of some humor in them, some really lovely friendships. I love talking about friendships. I love talking about adults, parent-child relationships.
The evolving nature of the relationship.
Yes, exactly. And, I took a really good look at a male-female friendship in this particular book and tried to decide, was it true in When Harry Met Sally when they said men and women can't be friends because the sex always gets in the way? Is that true? And I just thought, I'll write a book and find out. So I brought this male and female longtime friends together just to sort of see where, how far I could take that. But I do hope that people are really using fiction for what it's so good for, which is to maybe put some of our own stress, our own troubles to the side for a little bit and just get lost in a story. We know that television is wonderful for that. Movies is wonderful for that. But I would argue that fiction is really, you get so invested when you're reading a novel. So I really would encourage people to either go, contact their local bookseller and say, this is the kind of thing I like to watch. What would you recommend that I read?
Yes.
Or this is the kind of book that I love. What would you recommend? What might surprise me? And use fiction to sort of help get through these troubling times that we're in.
I had a great chuckle when I read about Bridget in musical chairs being dumped over email. And I thought, what a millennial moment for this woman to go through when she's not a millennial.
Right. Yeah.
Here's this middle-aged woman having to deal with that new thing that people are doing. How interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me about how that came about and what it spurred in the novel.
So I wanted this character to do something that it's a very well thought out email. So I wanted him to think that he had written something that was very sensitive and very thoughtful. The fact that he even puts in the email that it's his ex-wife who sort of encouraged him to end this new relationship, I thought might be just like an added little dig that would make it kind of funny. But yes, and then to be having her millennial children sort of right on the tail end of that coming in on the scene, I just thought would be a lot of fun. The character Sterling I call him persnickety in the book. He's just a bit of a diva. He's a little bit of one of these young people who sort of reached his peak very early. And because of that, everything that has happened to him since then, he's never quite living up to his promise of his youth. So he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder because of that. And I think Bridget's hoping for romance and hoping for love, but it's one of those things where maybe it was for the best. I think
eternal optimism.
Everyone around her seems to not be so heartbroken that this relationship has ended. So but the email breakup, I thought text, and then I was like, no, that's going too far. But I'll have it be a very thoughtfully written email and have her have to contend with that.
I loved it. What a great moment. We'll have to read the book to find out exactly what happens. I want to come full circle and ask you about what you learned about yourself during this COVID spring and summer. Is it that you're climbing the walls, dying to get out there and socialize again, or are you secretly an introvert and you're enjoying this time of looking inward and being quiet?
I would say that what I've learned is that I'm an odd combination of those two things. Because I feel as though on the one hand, I have my husband, my kids, my dog, my books, my laptop, which means I can do my work wherever I am. And I feel as though I could just do this forever. But then recently, a friend of mine popped into my town and said, do you want to just meet outside? We'll be socially distanced. We'll have a quick catch up. And it was so nice to see her. And I realized I'm getting weird. Like, I need to see people. It's not healthy to not remember what it's like to have a conversation with
how to make eye contact.
How to make eye contact. How to just get your attention going outward again. I think I've been doing a lot of sort of inward thinking, and it's just nice. It was so nice, and it felt so healthy, the way a good run would feel, to sit with someone and really have a conversation with them. So that made me sort of miss my writer friends and just miss people. But for the most part, I think it's shown me that I do pretty well. I do pretty well in lockdown mode. Just, I think because
enjoying your own thoughts, your own brain, your own talents.
But I have older kids. I mean, for those of you with younger children, it just, everyone I know is sort of going through something right now. And I think having younger children presents such a particular kind of challenge.
Well, I have to tell our audience to run to your website and check out the trailer for this book. It is hysterical. Tell me about the origins of that, and what a beautiful way to introduce the book.
That was so much fun. When it became very clear that I was not going on book tour, so the usual stops that I make, I have family in California, so I like to do a book stop there, and then I like to go to Texas. And when it just became clear that absolutely none of that was happening, I thought, well, how can I not only sort of introduce the book to readers, but how can I also do the brave thing and show a little bit more about what my life has been like in the last few months. So we did a very short 90-second little video because a lot of people have said to me about my other books as well, including Limelight, I see you in this main character. How autobiographical? How much is she you? And of course, there's always a certain amount to which our own personalities come into our characters. I think it's very hard to not have a bit of that, whether I'm writing men, women, children. There's always a little bit of yourself that comes through. But when somebody said that to me about this book, and I realized the situation that I was in of being in a summer house that has seen better days with kids coming home, I thought I need to sort of present this in a way. So I wrote this script and I took it to my children and I said, can we do this? And they said, okay, that looks a little complicated. I don't know, like we could try. We ended up shooting the entire thing 2 times. The first time was sort of our rough draft. I didn't know it was a rough draft when we did it. I thought that was the video. And then when my husband and my son was showing me the clips later, and my husband, his acting needed a little bit of help in a couple of the scenes. So when we looked at it later, we were like, okay, now we know what to do. Now we know how to sort of sharpen this up and make sure that it's nice and short and just a good introduction to the book. It was so much fun to make.
It was hilarious.
It's very amateur, but it was really fun.
It was perfect. What a perfect introduction. Amy Poeppel, thank you so much for your time. Best of luck with the book. We cannot wait to read this one.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun to talk.
Good luck.
Thank you.